So you know when you get to that part of the book where something has been repeated so many times, and then on that 100th time you just literally blow up. And it was at this line that I blew up. And it says, "The rites were thought to be carried out at night while naked." Why is everyone naked? Doesn't anyone have anything better to do than doing magic while at night while naked? Like, it wasn't the first time it was mentioned in this book. Like, it was mentioned a couple times that they were doing stuff, like they were doing magic while naked, and I'm just like, why is everyone naked? Why do they have to be naked? Welcome back to Goldilocks Original. I am Rose, as you should know by now. Oh, if you don't, hello, I am Rose and welcome back. And today we're going to be doing another book review. But if you watched my video last time on, I think it was The Girl and the Goddess or the national novel, well, either one of those two previous videos, I mentioned that it's not going to be a fictional based book, it's going to be a factual one. And as you can tell from the opening intro of this video, I had some thoughts. But to be honest with you, it's not bad thoughts. That was the only like exclaim I had throughout the book. Most of the time it was like really like informational stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the book quickly, and it is The Witch by Ronald Hutton, and a history of fear from the ancient times to the present. And I'm just going to read the blurb quickly, and then we're just going to get into what it contains and what it talks about. And as you can see, I've highlighted a lot of stuff. I'm not going to get into everything because it's quite an information overload for my brain, and I'm still digesting most of it. But I'm just going to quickly read the blurb. The witch came into prominence, and often a painful death, in early modern Europe. Yet her origins are much older and more geographical diverse. In this landmark book, Ronald Hutton traces witchcraft from the ancient world to the present day via the stakes, sorcerers, superstitions that have defined her image. So, and then it comes with a bunch of reviews from different people about it. And yeah, it was, I didn't really know what to expect at first, because I was looking for research books because I wanted to, when I began like in the midst of writing the book that I am right now, I wanted to do what the topic was justice. And so I was like, you know what, I should probably get some research and, you know, learn a bit more about the subject that I'm covering, which is obviously tied to witch trials. So I went to Waterstones, and I think it was actually last Christmas. I went with my dad, and I actually went to Waterstones. I actually asked the bookkeeper, no, not the bookkeeper, one of the booksellers, hey, is there any books about the witch trials and, you know, things about that. And she was like eagerly showed me to all these books, including this one. And she said this one was the most recommended, as she recently read it herself, and it's really good, and it taught a lot about not just about the witch trials, because actually it doesn't really go into the witch trials too much. Like, he does mention them and like all the accusations and everything, but it's normally, from what like I gathered, well, obviously because I read it, it's more about how that obviously the image, like how the characteristics were built, and how the folklore, superstitions, fairy tales played into it, as well as like different cultures played into it, like different, like the Romans are mentioned, the Greeks, the Egyptians, how everything, it wasn't just because of one folklore or one fairy tale or anything, it was like multiple things from different countries and cultures that really contributed to the, like, the naked witches doing spells at night. And it really educated me more about it, just because there were certain things that I didn't realise that it touched upon, that I'm going to go into right now, obviously. But it really, apart from me getting me a little bit outraged at one point, and rightfully so, it was really, I'm still absorbing it. This is why I'm just like, oh god, I don't even know how to describe it, but it was really educational and it was really enlightening for me personally. So I'm just going to go into the learning highlights of what I learned from this book, from what I just babbled on about. And one of the things that I found really interesting that I learned about was the kind of the ordination how magic sort of originated from. And I was really intrigued to find out, like, it came from Egyptians, and there's a whole chapter dedicated to it. It was called the Ceremonial Magic, the Egyptian Legacy, with a question mark at the end. And Ronald just goes into the whole culture of the Egyptians and how magic was tied in with both religion and just daily life there. And it was really interesting to learn about that and how it kind of affected all cultures in a way of how they perceived magic. Like, even like in negative connotations, it's still, those negative connotations sort of originated to Egyptians. And I felt that that was really interesting. And then another thing that I really learned about, that I didn't expect to learn about, to be honest, but here we are, was that the Romans really hated witches. Like, I'm laughing about it, but when I was reading about it, it was really like, okay, this is horrifying. He goes into a lot of reasons why, like, he can't say for definite this is why they feared and this is why, like, it's all theory based. But Romans really hated witches, and their hatred kind of like then sort of spurred on to other countries. Like, I think from what I gathered as well, like the Greeks that are mentioned, though they don't have a lot of thoughts on magic from the beginning anyway. They didn't have a lot of opinions, and they only began to sort of hate witches because of the Romans. That's what I felt that's what it came to. And so that's how, like, prominent influence the Romans had. Like, their hatred of witches sort of like spread around to other countries and made them hate them too. So that was interesting to learn about, and it made me, like, when I mentioned this to a friend, I was like, yeah, the Romans really hated the witches, and he was like, oh, I just thought they were just horny all the time. And I was like, fair dues, you can now put down on the list hated witches. So that's another lesson that I've learned through that. And one of the things that I really liked about Ronald Hutton's work as well is that he always, in each culture, in each like country that he spoke about witchcraft, he always referenced these recorded documents or of a witch trial, or someone accusing of someone of a witch, or how they experienced bewitchment and everything like that. And I felt that that was really interesting to it as well. That was a really interesting element to everything that I was reading, like hearing all these testimonies of these people saying, oh, this person did this to me, or I experienced this kind of witchcraft, or different types of magic as well. And I felt that that was really interesting. And alongside that, like, he's explored the folklore and the superstitions and the fairy tales that sort of contributed, like, that was created by hatred and fear that was originated by the Romans a little bit, but it then spurred on in different types of the world, different areas of the world, and how those different fairy tales, folklore and superstitions then built up the image of the witch that we know her to be in the UK. So that was interesting as well. And and I think alongside that as well, alongside the folklore and the fairy tales and the superstitions, we also learned about different types of magic in different cultures and countries. Like there's one section that talks about shanams, and how they sort of influenced the image of the witch as well, and how their powers, which were sort of like, they wouldn't be called a typical witch, their powers more originated from the spirits, and how they communicated with the spirits to influence the land or influence people, which was very interesting as well, and which contributed to other myths and fairy tales, which is both good and bad, like as all things nowadays, a blessing and a curse. Alongside like the folklore and like the myths and legends and all that kind of stuff, another key thing that played a role in the fear-mongering behind witches, aside of the Romans, because I think from what I got through the reading and research that was given to me, is that the Romans hated the witches, but they didn't really necessarily fear them. That's what I got, but the fear-mongering element originated a little bit more from the Germans, and you can see this a lot in their fairy tales, like Hansel and Gretel, and they really like hammered in how witches are like cannibals and will eat your children. And you can see a lot of that in their fairy tales, and that played a massive role of how witches were portrayed later on, and how the witch trials happened. And because a lot of the times that I read about in this book, like especially at the beginning, witches were characterised as dancing around naked or doing their spells naked, cannibals, like they would dig up old graves and eat of recent dead people and eat them. And yeah, it was it was so weird to read about, but as the book went on and you went into the folklore, especially about the Germans, you can understand how those sort of ideas were formed. And it sounds ridiculous, like I'm laughing in some points because it sounds ridiculous, but at the same time I did feel some sympathy towards those. Like, I definitely felt sympathy for those who got burned because of the accusations, but you feel some kind of sympathy for those who had to hear all these stories and then built up this irrational fear of witches that, you know, back in those days could be proven, but nowadays it would be silly. But like, you can't help but feel sympathy towards them, because all they wanted was an explanation for how disasters happen, how people they loved died so unnaturally, especially children. They just wanted answers. And back in those days there weren't a lot of medical research, there wasn't a lot of internet or anything like that, so they would blame witches or satanic magic to explain why these things happened. And it is really sad. I felt a lot of sympathy for everyone, because apart from the people that in charge of everything, but I felt more sorry for those everyday people that kind of were just trying to get by, and then something tragic happened and they just wanted answers. And I think that's what we all want when something tragic happens. We just want answers. Another interesting element though that I learned about the image of witches was fairies. I was just texting my friends about this at one point, because I know one of my friends is from Scotland, and I was just like, you have a lot of fairies in Scotland, don't you? Because the Scottish, they didn't really have a lot of like fear towards witches. It was mainly fairies. And to be honest with you, I felt like this was the origination of the Mortal Instruments series, because there was a fairy queen, there was a fairy king, and there was a secret land of where the fairies where the fairies come from, but they came to Earth to adopt people and that kind of stuff. Like, it was a whole chapter dedicated, or a whole part of it dedicated to like witches and fairies, and how the image of fairies in Scotland sort of influenced the perception of witches in England, because England feared witches, Scottish people feared fairies. It was just really interesting to learn how we're sort of in the same area, like we're only like next door to each other, but we had so different perceptions of magic and who was to blame. And because the reason why the Scottish feared fairies as well is that they saw fairies as demons, and so were evil by association. So that was really interesting to learn about. And another interesting thing that I laughed out loud about was that with these like stories of fairies in Scotland, they sort of spread out over the Europe, of course, and I think it started with the French as well. Some romance novels about fairies started coming out, and I was like, this is the Wattpad version of the 1600s. And I can't, like, Ronald Hutton sort of referenced some of the stories that were out about them, and I was just like, oh no. Wattpad existed before Wattpad was even created. So within this chapter of the global context, they just basically summarise different ways different cultures had views on witches, and there was this one country, it was in the province, it's in central Mexico basically, and they had different types of witches that they feared, and I'm not going to say I'm going to put into the title box here of the names of the different witches, because I cannot pronounce them. They're really like complicated names as well, so I'm just going to go through the list, and then each one that it belongs to I'll put up in the title. People of both sexes who harmed by a touch or glance, the local equivalent to the evil eye or touch. People, mostly women, who sucked the blood of infants and so killed them and caused harm to humans and their corpse or livestock. Men who could bring rain or hail. Magicians who were believed to have powers which could be used for good or harm, though were generally respected and much employed for healing and other magical uses. A person of either sex who changed into an animal to work harm or play tricks. So that was the list of witches, and I felt like that was really interesting aspect to all of it, because it definitely highlighted to me how different cultures sort of categorise witches a little bit as well, because within England there was only just the witch, she's fearful, she works for the devil, put her on the stake and burn her, well, or drown her. But it was different to see, it was very interesting to see how different cultures sort of viewed witches and how they sort of categorise them, and sort of, as it said in the book, respected sort of one of them because they provided goodness to the community. So that was really interesting to learn about. And the one aspect that I did laugh about though, about this chapter, and yeah, it was this line. It was not to do with the central Mexico. It was to do with another culture, and they said they associated witchcraft with strangers, loners, and people with red or squinting eyes, the greedy and the grumpy. And I love that because I was just like, I'm a loner. I would be accused of witchcraft right away. And yeah, so I laughed out loud about that because I was like, yeah. I'm glad we're not in that time right now. My next favourite chapter, or / favourite line was, I'm looking at my notes, sorry, was early modern patchwork, and this chapter was basically building up like all the different cultures and different religions and different ways every country in Europe and maybe outside of Europe as well contributed to the witchcraft image in England mainly. And so my favourite part in this was that, sorry, I was just reading another part of the notes for it. But the reason why I really liked this area was that it spoke about how men at one point were mainly accused and killed for witchcraft, and I felt like that was really interesting, because we normally hear about the women who were tried and murdered for witchcraft, and obviously that was very important, and it did go towards women towards the end of the witch trials. But in the beginning, in the early patchwork of it all, it was mainly focused on men, and I really liked how Ronald Hutton sort of went into that a little bit, and I'll show you a bit of a chapter on it, so hold on. Well, not chapter, area of it. So yeah, I'm just going to read this part really quickly, just so, what's going on? I could just hear the ambulance or the police. Is it the police or ambulance? It might be the police. Okay. So yeah, I'm just going to quickly read this line, and so it can just sort of highlight what's going on. It may be useful at this point to look quickly at other areas of Europe in which men were usually prominent as victims in the witch trials, and see what cultural factors may underpin such an outcome here. One of these was in Western and Central France, which remains relatively understudied in this regard. An immediately identifiable reason for the high proportion of men accused, about half, was the presence among two groups, churchmen and shepherds. The former may have been vulnerable because of their continued association with learned ceremonial magic, which had been linked to them in the region in the trials since the 14th century. The latter would to have been regarded as practicing magic, especially magical application in these parts of France, and a good study of the prosecution of them as witches in Normandy, where the local belief held shepherds could work harm with toad venom and stolen constricted hosts. There seems to be no evidence of the origins and the age of this folk tradition. And that was a very not enlightening, but very good point to put out, because we all know in our minds, like, it wasn't always just women, but we always thought it was predominantly women all the time. But I liked how Ronald sort of highlighted, hey, it just wasn't just women. At one point it was very much men who were accused of witchcraft and executed for it, and I felt like that was very important to point out. And it also made me feel better of my own novel a little bit, because I do write men as witches as well, and I was a little bit nervous about doing that, because I don't want people to be like, it was more women, you know, who were executed, and I'm just like, yeah, I know, but now I feel like, okay, yeah, it was also really badly men at one point. So that was really interesting to learn about, and a line that I kind of laughed about with this, not laughed about, but I found really like, oh, okay, it was mainly, this is why. I found it quite amusing when he said, when this was written, a study of Croatia, where 2/3 of the accused were male, suggests that this was because witches there were especially associated with bringing bad weather, and weather magic was locally thought for as more of a male interest. And I laughed at that a little bit. I was like, okay, men are all to blame for the weather disasters that we endure now, apparently. Last thing that, the last favourite part / line that I really piqued my interest was in the conclusion, actually. And in the conclusion, Ronald talks about all the facts that he's spoken, summarises everything that he's spoken about, and then he brings up, that's not the page, that's not the page either, there we go. He brings up Latin Christianity, and I don't think this was brought up before. literally that I've read so much, it could have been brought up before the conclusion. So if it was, then sorry Ronald, I clearly was of all the things that I wrote down in my notebook, I've probably went over my head a little bit. But in the conclusion he talks about how Latin Christians, and at some point I'll read out what it says. Latin Christianity came late to the adoption of ceremonial magic of this sort in the 12th and 13th centuries, when the importation and translation of texts, mostly from Greek and Arabic, introduced it. However, some other Latin Christians then took at least two aspects of it with great excitement, rapidly developing their own distinctive version of it, based on quartered circle as a standard location for rites, and the pentagram as the most powerful geometrical figure for use in them. An effort was made to secure the astral magic, in particular the status of a respectable branch of learning. This failed. And in the 13th century, a growing orthodox backlash developed against ceremonial magic, which resulted in its effective demonization by the end of that century. And what I got from that was that Latin Christians tried to use magic, didn't work, so they were like, you know what, witches are all bad, let's kill them all. But as Ronald goes into as well, it wasn't just Latin Christians, it was a combination of different aspects of different cultures and different countries and different ages as well throughout the centuries and everything like that contributed to the absolute fear of witches that still kind of like resonates a little bit nowadays, because I know people that when I say that I'm Wiccan, they've been like, oh, that's really bad, witches, like you're gonna have a lot of bad luck on your hands now. And I was just like, what is this, the 13th century? Like, leave me be. So my overall thoughts on the book, the main things that I felt were both enlightenment and anger. And I felt some anger just because I think it was kind of like a natural response when you hear about, especially with the individual cases that you hear about that Ronald's Hutton sort of goes into a little bit. I felt angered in that way, like these innocent people were like not only accused of witchcraft, but they were also tortured to confess a lot of the times, especially by I think it was Pete the Judge or something like that. I can't really remember on the top of my head. I know I've got it in my notes somewhere. But it wasn't just by him, it was other people who did the torturing too. Like they would say questioning, but it was actually torture. And they would just torture them to confess the things. And then when they made up these stories, they're like, yeah, that's it. We're gonna, no more torture for you. You're gonna get executed now. And I felt like so much anger and upset by it. And especially when I learned, especially in the opening chapters, is that witchcraft trials sort of still exist today, and I didn't really realise that, and I think that's both uneducated of me and ignorant, but I think from what Ronald says, especially with the latest case being in 2013, he says that like some cultures still believe in witchcraft and they still execute and tried them, and I think that's more in the Middle East. Like I'll have to put in like the title or something like that, but it's in different cultures and it still exists today. And I was a little bit upset when I read that. I was like, oh, okay, we still haven't, I know it's not us, it's not our country, but it felt very upsetting when I read that. And I felt so educated as well afterwards. I was like, okay, I now know more of how the world back then came to hate witches so much and the influences behind it and why it was so scary. Like those times were really scary, like not just with witches but with everything that goes on in that world. Like they could, and the thing is that they had no idea why these bad things were happening. Like they had no idea why the plague happened, they had no idea why a child suddenly died, or why this natural weather was taken over. Like they didn't understand these things. Like, yeah, there was slowly over time we learned, but back then it was a scary time and they needed someone to blame. And back in those days it was like, it's her fault, she's cursed us, but we bewitched us and everything like that. And 10 out of 10 would never want to live in those times. Like, it was so much fear, and people just, especially those who wanted power, just added into that fear. They wanted people to fear something, so they would lean on those powerful figures to protect them. And I think another thing that's really like influenced me in this way as well is learn about the different folklore and myths and legends and fairy tales that sort of that originated in different countries, like in different areas of England and Scotland and Welsh, and it was learn about all of those and how it was so weird to learn how different areas of England in particular as well believe different things about witches. And I was like, okay, we're in the same country, yeah, but one person in this area believes this, but then this person in this area believes that. That's interesting. Like, it was very like, I don't really know how to describe it. It was just very interesting, and I liked how he put some of the research into it and how he explained why these people in the same country believe different things a little bit as well. I felt towards the end very empowered. Like empowered to give those who were killed because of the witch trials or because they were accused of witchcraft, both men and women, I felt empowered to give them a story that they deserved, and also a story that would sort of give them a bit of justice, or I don't know, just something that would humanize each and every person who did witchcraft or was accused of it because of an angry neighbour or because natural causes of like a sudden death or something. And I felt like I felt more empowered to do them justice a little bit more, and this book has really helped me see different viewpoints and different how everyone's cultural differences sort of added to it, and then also made the witch figure as it was in England. And yeah, another thing as well that I felt really interesting with Ronald was because even though he mentioned Latin Christianity in the conclusion, I don't know if he mentioned, I can't remember from the top of my head if he mentioned it in other parts of the book. He probably did, but what I found interesting as well is that it wasn't really, even though he touches upon religion here and there, he didn't really go into it full blown. Like, he was like, yes, religion had a part to play in why these witch trials happened and how the fear mongering of witches happened, but it wasn't the big element of it. Yes, it added to it, but it wasn't the catastrophic thing, and there was multiple reasons why it happened, and I liked how he explored each and every area, and yeah, I really liked that as well. So to conclude this video, Ronald Hutton, thank you for The Witch. It was very enlightening, even though my brain is still digesting most of the information because I read it over 3 days. Like, I was hoping to get it done in 1 day, but I didn't realise how much information I was going to be reading. I'm like, oh god, this is going to take a while. Like, it was really good, but my brain afterwards, I was like, oh my god, information overload. And I'm still digesting it a little bit because I only finished it properly yesterday, so I'm still digesting it. But I really enjoyed it, and it really gave me some more perspectives and more cultural influences that contributed to it, and that I can sort of carry into my own novel as well. So to end this video, I'm just going to quickly reveal the book that I'm aiming to do a review on next, and like read and do a review on next. I don't know when the video will be out. I'm hoping it's going to be sometime next week that I can get it out, because I haven't started reading it yet, and I suspect that it will take me 3 days, amount of 3 days to finish it, because that's how long I took to read The Witch. But if I don't get it out next week, it will probably be mid-November, due to my schedule, like my filming of National Novel Writing Month next month, which I'll quickly go into in a second. But the next book will be Tracy Borman's Witches, James I and the English Witch Hunts, and I'm looking forward to reading that. It's just about as long, well, I know that one seems thicker, but that like literally about the same amount of pages for the research, because that one has a really big index in it, so that's why that one looks bigger. But I look forward to reading this, and that will be the next book review. For the next month, for the filming schedule, it will be a bit of a, not complicated or a mess, but I'm basically going to be filming throughout November my editing process and everything, and I'm hoping to aim to release a week, a video once a week of a week's editing, if that makes sense. Like, I'm going to be filming that week, and then hopefully I'll edit and post the video on Monday. But I can't guarantee that I'm going to be doing that, because I also have to work, and I also have to study for something else, so it's going to be a very busy month in November. So if it isn't posted by Monday, then just bear with me. I am going to get it edited and post it and everything like that. And some of the filming as well is going to be done on my phone, which will be very interesting. Well, I'm hoping anyway. If not, it's going to be all on this camera. But that's about it. I hope all my thoughts were okay. I hope it wasn't too much of a mess. And yeah, I really enjoyed reading this book. And I hope I learn more from this one as well. Yeah, I'm still digesting it, and I really enjoyed it, and that's all I can really say now. I'm literally blurted out all my thoughts now. So until next time, guys, I'll see you later. Bye.